Coming up on episode 5 of In-Flight Snack, Duane Brown returned to practice and Corey Davis unexpectedly retired from the NFL. We'll have more on that, plus a full recap of episode 3 of Hard Knocks and a whole lot more coming up right after this on In-Flight Snack. Stay tuned.
Let's go to eat a damn snack.
Welcome back to In-Flight Snack, a New York Jets podcast on the Believe Podcast Network. I am your host, Rami Lavi, and what an interesting time to be doing this. So, just a little backstory. If you don't know, I told my backstory a little bit on the first episode. You can go back and listen. I work at WFAN. I produce Yankee games on the Fan. I just got home. And it just reminds you what a superstar does for a team. The Yankees are playing some of the worst baseball of my lifetime. In fact, they hadn't lost 9 games in a row, which they were coming off a 9-game losing streak. And they hadn't done that since 1982, which is 15 years before I was even thought of as an item or anything. And so the fact that they were that bad and playing that poorly, and then the calls we were fielding after the Yankee game on WFAN tonight, we're all positive. Why? Because a bunch of people went to a ballpark and paid a bunch of money. And you know what they saw? They got their money's worth. They saw a superstar in Aaron Judge only an hour after their general manager came out in front of the media and said this season has been an absolute disaster. Their superstar gets up there and he hits 3 home runs, including a grand slam. And he shows you what superstars do. And the thought is that now the Jets have one of those. They have their superstar in Aaron Rodgers. And that's why it's so special to have a guy like that. So I was thinking about it on the train home, and I was thinking about that exactly. I was thinking about Aaron Judge and Aaron Rodgers and the connection between the two and what I do. And I like to connect my personal life to this podcast if I can, not to get too personal, but just connect stories that you can relate to, that you hear that story and you say, wow, that's crazy. This could be something that happens for my team. I was talking to my friend Dexter Henry, who's one of our hosts, and he hosts on SNY as well. And we were talking about the different things, how often the Jets have had expectations and how rare it's been that us Jets fans tend to cling to these expectations when there are expectations. When something small goes our way, Jet fans tend to cling to it. And so this offseason, Hard Knocks, everything that's happened this year for the New York Jets, it makes sense. I understand why people are so obsessed and so into it and are hyping them up and talking them up. Do I think this Jets team is going to win a Super Bowl in year 1 of Aaron Rodgers? No. The goal is to be the Bucks of 2020, to be, I don't know, the Rams of 2022 or 2021. To be the Broncos, whatever year that was, 2015 or 16. That's the goal. Do I believe it will happen? Probably not. Odds are stacked against you. There's 31 other teams. There's a Patrick Mahomes in your conference. There's a Joe Burrow and a Josh Allen in your conference. If you make it as far as the Super Bowl, you have to face Kyle Shanahan's offense with the 49ers defense. Or Philadelphia and Jalen Hurts could have been MVP last year, or anyone else. So yeah, odds are they won't win. But to think that they have a chance, to think that it's certainly possible, that's why we do this. That's why we talk about the team. That's why they're on Hard Knocks, which we'll get to a little bit later. That's why everything. That's why we're sports fans in the first place. So I understand if you're a Jets fan and you want to be excited right now, you should be. Because it's an exciting time. And we don't have a ton of those. So before I get into the full Hard Knocks episode, because I have my notes here, I have them written down, and so I'm going to be going back to some of those. But before we get into that, two news stories from today for the New York Jets. Number one, and I guess by the time you hear this, it's yesterday. So we're talking about Wednesday. So today's Thursday, but two news stories from Wednesday. Number one happened earlier in the day. Duane Brown reported to practice for the first time, off the PUP list and back at practice. What does that mean for the Jets offensive line? I'm not sure yet. I don't think we'll know because he's not going to play in game for a little bit. I don't think he'll be ready for week one. But it seems like everything we've talked about with his offensive line and everything Rodgers and Saleh and everyone has talked about is continuity, consistency, having the same people together on a daily basis. And that means having AVT and Becton, if you're going to be on the right side at tackle and guard, Becton at tackle, AVT at guard on the right side, have that every week, have the consistency, have that every day in practice. And it seems like that's what they're doing. Duane Brown's going to come back and play the left side and protect Aaron Rodgers' blind side. Hey, I hope he's healthy. I hope he's the Duane Brown we thought we were getting when the Jets brought him in initially. He's older. It's tough to rely on him. But when he was great, he was a really great player. And Rodgers knows and trusts his veterans. So having him back at practice is huge because it means he's going to be part of that continuity, even if he's not in game immediately. So that's a big deal for the Jets offensive line. One of the biggest question marks going into the season was and remains the Jets offensive line. You could have all the weapons in the world. You could have the run game. You could have the running backs. You could have Mecole Hardman on quick slants and end arounds and all those different things and screen passes and Garrett Wilson, who's a huge game changer and a difference maker in the secondary. But if Rodgers doesn't have time to get the ball out, if Rodgers is running for his life back there, Dexter Henry mentioned something. He talked about the Super Bowl with Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes is one of the greatest quarterbacks we've ever seen, most talented quarterbacks we've ever seen. But when he was running for his life in that Super Bowl against the Bucs, there was nothing he could do. He made some incredible plays in that game, but they still couldn't. They couldn't win that game. They couldn't score because at some point, the quarterback's got to have time back there, and he's got to be able to stand in the pocket. First down, cool. You did a gimmicky throw. Second down, you ran the ball for 5 yards. But there's going to be a 3rd and 5, a 3rd and 10 in crucial spots in a football game. And if the defense can just pin their ears back and go after you and know that no one's stopping you, it's impossible to play quarterback in that situation. So Duane Brown returning to practice is a big deal for the Jets, but it needs to be a big deal. It needs to be significant in order for this Jets team to go far. Now, the other thing was Corey Davis. I was on the subway and I didn't have service. I was in and out of service on the train. And then I kind of saw it when I was at one stop. I saw the headline, Corey Davis retired. And I got out. I was going to do a walk and talk video when I was walking from the train to WFAN, but I'm so not that. Maybe I should get better at that because if I'm trying to do this for a living, maybe I should get better at the holding the phone, walking the street. Yo, guys, crazy news just dropped. I'm practicing. Corey Davis just announced his retirement from the NFL. Big reaction coming later tonight on the podcast. Stay tuned. I don't know. How was it? Tell me in the comments. Sound off below. It's another thing those people say. But yeah, it's a big deal. It's a big story because this is a guy who was, 2 years into a 4-year contract? A guy who was talked about in the offseason, talked about in trades. He didn't quite live up to the contract, but the first 2 years he was here, his quarterbacks were Zach Wilson, Mike White, Josh Johnson, Joe Flacco, well documented, Chris Streveler. So I don't know how much we can blame a Corey Davis for not living up to his potential. He had some big games here. And there was a very telling, and we'll get to this a little bit later when we talk about Hard Knocks, the foreshadowing and how much foreshadowing there was in Hard Knocks. There's something telling about what Corey Davis said in one of the episodes, and this might not have even been Hard Knocks. This might have been on One Jets Drive, and we'll actually talk about the difference between the two in a second. But on One Jets Drive, I think he was sitting there with his family and his wife and his kids, and he's like, this is what it's all about. I just love hanging out here with my family, being here. He looked slow. He didn't look great in practices, in any of the preseason stuff, any of the practices, joint practices, mini camps. Everyone who saw him, a lot of people who were out there said he hasn't looked great. And he said this was something he was contemplating for a long time, and he announced his retirement. I hope he's good. I hope he feels good. Sometimes you just got to get away from the game for a little bit. Even Randall Cobb talked about that he thought once he was out of Green Bay, he thought he was done. And sometimes you need that mental break. I know it. I've been there. You need a mental break from certain things. I have never been or done anything as grueling and demanding as an NFL schedule and maintaining that kind of fitness and body and workout and staying. Sometimes you have to prioritize. He's made a lot of money in his life. He's giving back $10.5 million this year to not play football, to step away. That's a lot of money for a guy who hasn't made hundreds of millions like Aaron Rodgers, who just gave back $35 million, which is a ton of money too. But is a guy who's made tens of millions of dollars in his career. So another 10 is a significant amount of money for him, significant amount of money for anyone, even though I'm sure he's doing fine financially. I just hope we don't hear that this story comes out and there was something worse going on. This was something he was struggling with. He was away from the team for a little bit on personal absence, and the Jets said they were going to monitor the situation. They were in touch with him and all was good. But clearly, this was something he was struggling with for a while. And he announced on his Instagram that he was retiring. And the Jets and Robert Saleh said the door's open if he wants to return, if he wants to come back. They love him. I think he found a real home with the Jets. I think that team is something special. They built something special just as a culture and as a family. And I feel like if he wants back in, they would gladly have him. The wide receiver room is pretty good. There's a misconception that it's Garrett Wilson and trash. You paid a lot of money to Allen Lazard. Allen Lazard is a really good wide receiver who Aaron Rodgers was very reliant on. Do you know that in 3 less games last year, Randall Cobb had more production than Elijah Moore in 3 less games? Randall Cobb is no slouch. He wouldn't still be playing. He's only 32 years old. He wouldn't still be playing if he thought he couldn't do it anymore. He talked about contemplating retirement. We'll talk about it in a second when we talk about Hard Knocks, what he brings to the team from a chemistry perspective off the field. But he's also a really good receiver on the field. Obviously, there's Garrett Wilson and Mecole Hardman you brought in. So that's 4 right there. Pretty good receivers. Does this open up a spot for a guy like Brownlee, who performed really well for most of training camp? Does this open up a spot along with maybe the injury that we saw in preseason to Izzy Abanikanda? Does this open up a spot to keep Bam Knight, at least for now, so you don't have to cut him or put him on the practice squad, buys you some time? Does the $10 million in cap space now open up a spot for you to go try and make one last-ditch effort to find someone to shore up the left side of that offensive line? There's a lot of different things that this could mean for the team. But for Corey Davis, on a personal and professional level, I wish him the best of luck and hope he's doing all right, and him and his family. And it's truly what it is, that he just wants to spend more time with his wife and his kids, and hopefully that is the case for Corey Davis. I believe it is, probably. I don't think he would lie about that, but I just hope all is good. Now, I mentioned Hard Knocks. We're going to talk about Hard Knocks right after this. All right, so Hard Knocks and One Jets Drive. There's a difference between the two. It's a big difference between the two. And they started to blend together a little bit on this last episode. And it frustrated me. When I watched the episode the first time through, I loved it. The second time through, I took notes. And then when I thought back about it, today I was thinking about it, I kind of got upset. So One Jets Drive is exactly what you'd expect it to be. It's like a behind-the-scenes YouTube vlog. That's literally what it is. It's just random behind-the-scenes videos of Jets fluff, propaganda, whatever you want to call it, building up the Jets excitement. And Jet fans eat it up. They love it. Because, like I said earlier, they're starving for positivity, for content that's positive. There's so much negative talk around the Jets in the media, and just them playing football is negative Jets content. Have you watched this team play the last 10 years in particular? They have the longest playoff drought in sports currently with the Sabres. after the Kings made the playoffs this past year. So there's a lot of negative surrounding the Jets. So Jet fans are looking for something positive. So they don't hate one Jets drive. But you won't find anything negative on it. And a lot of it, there's no like real storylines. It's super random. Like it feels really random. Like, okay, here's a behind the scenes video of the Jets at practice. Now here's a behind the scenes video of one of the Jets in his home. Now here's a beside. Maybe there's less narration than there is in Hard Knocks. I can't put my finger on it, but it just feels more random. It feels like there are more stories. And what Hard Knocks did so well in this episode, in episode 3, was foreshadowing. Now, I was watching this episode and I was thinking to myself, if I were the creators of Hard Knocks and the NFL films, I'd be furious with the Jets. I think the lack of access that the Jets have given, I think they've guarded more than Hard Knocks maybe thought they would be guarding, and I'd be furious. I would just, it's almost not worth it. But let's talk about the episode and then we'll get to that. Let's start with the foreshadowing. The number one thing. You saw this with Randall Cobb, and obviously the Jets knew what's coming on Hard Knocks because the day before or earlier in the day when Hard Knocks came out on Tuesday, Aaron Rodgers has a press conference and he says, I know Cobby said, hey, 8's going to blow up at some point. So clearly Rodgers watches the episodes before the episodes air, right? Because earlier in the day, Cobb says at a practice, he's surrounded by a bunch of wide receivers. He's like, you guys are making mistakes. We're making mistakes all over the place. 12's going to pop one day. He's not going to take it anymore. He's not going to be able to handle it. Now he's all being nice and everything. Rodgers disputed it. I'm calling bullshit on Aaron Rodgers, though. I don't believe you, buddy. I think you will snap. I've seen you. And I've seen you in this season, in this preseason, yelling about things on the sideline. Don't tell me you're not the fiery guy, fiery competitor, because you still are. And there's nothing wrong with that. Rodgers wants to come off as, no, I'm this lovey-dovey guy. I don't care. But the funny part to me when I watched that scene, and we'll talk about what it was foreshadowing in a second, as Cobb's talking to the receivers saying, Rodgers needs to trust you. Rodgers needs to find a trust. Otherwise, he's not going to throw it to you. If he can't trust that you'll be in that spot, he doesn't like throwing interceptions, one of the things he said. So if he can't trust that you'll be there, he's just not going to throw the ball to you. So one of the things when Rodgers was first coming to the Jets, and this is what Hard Knocks would have done if Hard Knocks was allowed to. They would have shown the drama. They would have talked about the media. And one of the clips they would have played was Craig Carton, who likes to run his mouth, one of my former colleagues, who now works for Fox Sports, and I have a special relationship with him. He doesn't know about it so much, but he has a special place in my heart because he's the reason I wanted to do this. And he actually was the first one who I reached out to, and he sent me an email back. So if you don't like him, I'm sorry, but I had somewhat of a relationship with him, and he holds a special place in my heart because I wouldn't be doing this for a living. I wouldn't have this career if it weren't for him. So that's just a side on Craig. But Craig always talked about Rodgers has this wish list. He's coming to the Jets with this wish list. Who are you, Aaron Rodgers? I don't want him and his wish list. He wants Randall Cobb, who's old. We can't have that. Well, guess what, Craig? Aaron Rodgers and his wish list, how's that going for you? You have a guy who not only was his most reliable target in Green Bay and Allen Lazard over the last couple of years, and he's going to be there on a daily basis to help be the security blanket. Talked about the 3rd and 10s under pressure. I'm sure Garrett Wilson will get there, and we'll get to that in a second. But for now, it's Allen Lazard. He's that guy that he trusts. For years, it was Randall Cobb. So Randall Cobb, bringing him in to teach these guys how to get to that point with Rodgers. And then later, it shows Garrett Wilson becoming that guy. Garrett Wilson is becoming Rodgers' go-to guy. And what did he say in the press conference? He says, Lazard and Cobb are the ones who taught me, who helped me. They're like extra translators from Rodgers speak to what I need to know so that I can be the best, so I can be ready for game day, so I can take that next step with the team. So Rodgers can rely on me, so Rodgers can trust me. This is so important for the Jets to have a guy like Randall Cobb there. And I'm telling you, Garrett Wilson is becoming that guy every day. And it's worth every dime to pay a guy like Cobb and Allen Lazard and bring them in. Were they positions of need necessarily? Well, now that we know Corey Davis retired and they traded Elijah Moore, yeah, I guess they were areas of need. At the time when they acquired them, no, not really. But it's worth it. That's why you bring those guys in. So you talk about a wish list. Rodgers doesn't have a wish list because he's LeBron and he just wants to be comfortable where he's going. And he's bringing James Jones along with him to sit on the bench and not play. He's bringing guys that are going to make this team better because Rodgers wants to win, that are going to make the transition smoother. So whether it's Nathaniel Hackett or Randall Cobb or Alan Lazard, this is why these guys are here. Now, there was also a scene right after this where the former Jets are there, Mark Sanchez and Braylon Edwards. First of all, when was the last time you had Jets from that era at a Jets practice? It's just, you don't see it anymore. There's a buzz around this team. My father talked about all the celebrities and Darrelle Revis showing up, and he's like, it's too positive, it's too much. I agree with him in a sense, but former Jets feeling like they want to come back and be a part of something special and taking pride in the franchise. So Damian Woody at practice also. That's something new. That's awesome. That's something that is because they're building the team the right way. And you saw Rodgers is talking to those guys, and he's saying, yeah, Garrett is so special. Garrett Wilson is so special. And they showed an interesting montage in the hot take king, I guess you want to call him. Sean Morash said on Twitter, he's like, why in all those throws are kind of just a little bit behind Garrett Wilson, or they're just a little bit off? Because that's literally what Rodgers said. He said, he's so quick that sometimes I throw it a little bit behind him. Or if I make a not perfect throw, he adjusts and makes a great catch. So they showed a montage of throws that were either a drop behind or not great throws, and Garrett Wilson making up for it. We know that Rodgers, it's so funny when you think about, like, guys want to spread the ball, but I was just watching Tom Brady in the 28-3 game in that comeback. He's throwing it over and over again to Edelman because that's who he trusts. When they Brady wants to throw the ball and spread it around as much as possible. But when I'm deep in it and I need a 25-point comeback in the Super Bowl, I'm going to throw it to the guy I trust most over and over and over again. Aaron Rodgers needs that guy. Whether it was Jordy Nelson, whether it was Randall Cobb, whether it was Devontae Adams, and whether now it can be Garrett Wilson, and it looks like it's becoming that guy. And this whole episode, throughout the episode, it starts with the foreshadowing with Cobb talking to the receivers, continues with Garrett Wilson at his press conference, and then Rodgers eventually talking about Garrett Wilson to the former Jets, to Braylon Edwards. You realize, okay, this is the story they're trying to tell. I told you that Hard Knocks does such a great job of telling stories. That's a story. They're telling the story of Garrett Wilson blossoming into the security blanket for Aaron Rodgers and the number one receiver we've seen him have throughout his career. Now, Rodgers said something really interesting about Garrett Wilson, just to stay on this topic for a minute. He said he's the difference in this practice. Everyone talked about the first practice against Carolina, the joint practice, where the Jets struggled and everyone blamed the offensive line. Robert Saleh rips into the offensive line. This is terrible. This is our first op, blah, 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 blah. We played it a couple episodes ago. You go back and listen, or you go watch episode 2 of Hard Knocks, a famous Robert Saleh rant, yelling at the offensive line and how bad they've been. So when I tell you that Garrett Wilson becoming the security blanket is so important, don't trust me. Don't take my word for it. How did we start this episode? We started this episode talking about Duane Brown, talking about the offensive line and how bad it's been and how this could spiral the team. This could derail the entire season. But having Garrett Wilson makes the difference, makes all the difference in the world. And that's what Rodgers talked about. You heard Will talk about the difference. The O-line looked much better against Tampa than it looked against Carolina. Will Parkinson said that on this podcast a couple days ago. Well, Aaron Rodgers said, you know why the offensive line was so much better? Because Garrett Wilson gets open in a split second. There's a scene where he comes up to Rodgers, Garrett Wilson, and goes, I don't understand. Why are they not covering me? So you don't need a great offensive line. Now, I said there's still going to be situations where it's 3rd and 10 and you need to make a throw. But that's what that special connection is for. Rodgers can release the ball earlier than he has to because he knows Garrett Wilson's going to be there. And you don't need as much time when you have that kind of trust and relationship with the guy. So that developing ultimately can save the offensive line, can turn the offensive line from, oh, we have a 38-year-old quarterback, we need a top 5 offensive line in the league, to no, because of the weapons we have, offsetting it with the run and this guy, Garrett Wilson, and the connection he has with Aaron Rodgers, we'd be fine with the number 15 or number 18 offensive line in the league as long as we're not bottom 10. That could be a huge difference. The next thing, and they foreshadow this a little bit, but they show Robert Saleh's speech to the team. It's so interesting to see the development of Robert Saleh. Episode 1 is a motivational speech. Starts with a motivational speech, the crow, the eagle, that whole thing. Episode 2, he reams the offensive line, rips into them. And in episode 3, he almost combines the two. I'm going to motivate you, and I'm going to tell you how to be better at the same time. I'm going to kind of dig at the offensive line again and bring it all together. And it kind of was the progression from episode 1 through episode 3 of Robert Saleh, the head coach. And I love this. This is one of my favorite speeches I've heard, because he talks about the 4 levels of competitors, the 4 different types of competitors. And I can speak, and probably a lot of people can't. In my life, I've been each one of these 4 types of competitors. He said the bottom of the barrel, the worst of the worst, is survivors. Do the bare minimum. Do anything you can to survive. I know times in my life where you're just not feeling it, and you're just trying to get by. You're just trying to survive. You're just trying to do things to get to the next day to keep you going. So whether it's do the bare minimum at practice to make sure I make the team, whether it's do the bare minimum in the workout room, study room, so I could get by, you're a survivor. Then the level above that is contenders. These are people who are motivated by external factors. These are people who are motivated, whether it's money, fame. Those are the examples he gave. Whether it's trying to impress someone, the coach, someone in your personal life. But the second those factors fall away, and I've been there in life where, okay, I do this because I'm motivated by X. When X goes away, everything crashes. You're back to 0 and you don't do anything. Then he said level 2 is a competitor. Competitors are really great. Competitors are self-motivated. They do it for themselves. They want to prove it to themselves. They're hungry. They're always pushing for more. They're fighting for more. They're self-motivated. They don't need anything to motivate them. And so because they're self-motivated and honest with themselves, they push harder than anyone. They keep pushing. Even if things aren't going their way, they continue to push and persevere through everything. And being a competitor is an incredible thing. But there's one thing better than being a competitor, and that's being a commander. I can't honestly say I said I've been in all 4 places in my life. I don't know if I've ever been a commander. I'd like to think I have been at points in my life, but a commander is everything a competitor is. But the only thing on top of it is they elevate everyone around them. They bring people with them. Damn, that was awesome. That's such a fucking awesome speech that he gave to the team, and it's a perfect analogy. And then he says, the offensive line, you guys were guests at the party, but the defense, they were the commanders. They brought you along with them. Now we're all here together. Defense, thank you for showing up. Offense, thank the defense for being there for you. Now let's all blossom into competitors, but not only that, commanders, helping each other grow. And you know what he said when he was talking about this speech? One of the things that was so just jumped out to me was he said, this is a culture we've been building, Joe and I, for the last 3 years, finding guys who are competitors and commanders and bringing them together for the last 3 years. Aaron Rodgers doesn't just show up to a place because this is where he wants to go and the culture changes. Aaron Rodgers is the cherry on top.